everyone, and thank you for joining me for this session on global mobility in crisis. I am Professor Michael Dickmann, and I have worked with a range of organizations and governments, for-profit and not-for-profit organizations around the world in this area. As you know, COVID-19 has meant huge differences and changes for people at work and in work. And therefore, today I want to cover what that means for global mobility. I hope you can all now see my screen. And what I want to therefore illustrate is how companies can deal with hostile and dangerous context due to COVID-19 or other activities. What I would like to cover in this session is to analyze different strategic drivers of global assignments. And this means pre-COVID in one sense. Then explore the current impact of COVID-19 on global mobility and discuss longer-term effects of COVID-19 in their impact on strategic GM drivers. GM will stand for global mobility, and the last point I want to illustrate through a study I've done sponsored by Ernst & Young into exactly this phenomenon. But I want to start telling you something about my fundamental assumptions in this area and to sensitize you to what often global companies really think. So a while back, I was asked by PwC to meet their global mobility team and the key partners in their work, and they were telling me what global mobility for in their mind for PwC means. And at the time, it was something about compliance, as they call it. So making sure that a worker who works abroad has the right to do so, has a working visa, and social security payments and all tax payments are done, etc. It also meant bringing this worker from country A to country B. But PwC wouldn't do that. They would get some shipping company involved. That was core to their idea of what global mobility is. In reality, here are my two assumptions that companies should integrate into their work. The first assumption is it is something that is what technically is called mutual dependency. And that means the company is very much dependent on the individual, and the individual is very much dependent on the company in this field. So working abroad suddenly means you might have a bigger job, but you also might be more dependent on the company, especially if it is in a hostile environment. And the second assumption is it's a long-term business. It is not just bringing people abroad and allowing them to work. It is about what happens when they work abroad and what happens when they return. So this is the underlying assumptions. These are the underlying assumptions for this slide that you see there. And I don't want to go through it in detail because we don't have the time, but in essence, if you look at the area, it can be segmented into 4 parts. The first one is organizational IM, international mobility strategies and structures, and those policies and practices. And in reality, it boils down to why do we actually have this really expensive undertaking that is sending a person from one country to another to work there? Why can't locals do it, for example? And this might mean your strategic approach to it. What do you want to achieve? What sort of objectives do you have as an organization? Why is this important? And crucially, can we also have locals developed so that they take on these objectives? For the individual, in this case, this is all before the actual global mobility activity. if you look at it as an own person, it's about your interest, why you would want to live and work abroad, what drives your careers, and what career plans do you actually have. The second quadrant here is about selection and preparation of the right people to work abroad from the organization's point of view. And I undertake I work with about 1,000 multinationals every year to do one big survey. And in essence, these multinationals keep on telling me they're looking for the right talent. Most of them do find that they have a talent gap for those people who are willing to work abroad. For the individual, in the lighter blue, it's about negotiation and preparation. Yes, you can negotiate with your organization if it sends you abroad some elements of your package. The third quadrant is about, for the organization, think about how you can do international development, how you can further the career through career planning, and undertake some performance management of those people, expatriates who work abroad. This is often the case that companies have a out of sight, out of mind syndrome. But expatriates really do not like this, especially in terms of their own developmental interventions and their career patterns. For individuals, when they work abroad, it's about adjustment to the local culture. It's about their own development, and it's about something we call career capital impact. So basically, what working abroad does to your capabilities as a professional, to your networks, and to your set of motivations and your own identity, because all of these are impacted. And lastly, when people return, it's about planning of the next move, and I call it move because they might go, of course, to a third country, reintegration into that environment, and a review of outcomes. So companies should measure what they're doing in global mobility. For individuals, it's about readjustment, let's say back home, and use of career capital, so use of these capabilities, networks that they have acquired, and also understanding of their new grown identity. So in a sense, this is a generic picture that you might want to explore as an organization and as individuals with all the dependencies there. Having said this, I want to concentrate mostly on the first quadrant of why do we do this? And so it's about what goals does a multinational organization actually pursue with global mobility? In my work with multinationals, I'm trying to explore these different goals because they are attached to different policies and practices then, and different indicators of success. Now, if you look at this, one of the key drivers traditionally has been the rapid substitution of expatriates, or simply position filling because we couldn't find somebody local who could do this work as well. But you can see development of future leaders or general career development as key drivers. In fact, that's the most common driver that companies quote to me. Then companies do this for control and coordination purposes. It's basically about integrating your operations. Control is integrating it through control mechanisms, and coordination is a cultural integration of your worldwide operations. A growing reason is knowledge transfer, either into the subsidiary abroad or from it back into head office. But you can have all sorts of other reasons, including individual compensation. Now, as I indicated, these different key drivers actually have different implications. If you look at those, you can distinguish short-term business needs, long-term business needs, and strategic business needs. In terms of short-term business needs, these are about skill shortage and rapid deployment. This is a scenario, let's say, for if Shell needs a oil well drilling engineer on some platform somewhere in an ocean, and the key engineer has fallen ill, they will helicopter people out to fill that gap as soon as possible, because every day that this platform can't actually operate costs them $1 million or more in terms of dollars. So the challenge for HR is immediate readiness for the job, and there are cultural and personal challenges. If you look at long-term business needs, like knowledge transfer and control and coordination, it's about generating the knowledge and coordination payback. The short-term business needs, the payback is immediate. The long-term business needs, the payback takes a long time actually to be generated. And crucially, it creates a local glass ceiling for local talent. So the payback must compensate for this, and you must plan for it. And then lastly, strategic business needs about career development and global leadership. The key bit is about return planning and retention of people, and therefore their long-term career planning. I'm emphasizing this because some of the empirical work I have done in combination with Saratoga and PwC shows that people on a strategic business need assignment have the highest chance to not have a job upon return. And therefore there is an issue. Now, this is the general idea about why do we have global mobility. And it might end in really good outcomes, okay? So if you work abroad in what I call now friendly environments and good times, okay, on average, what we get from a range of research is that individuals report personal growth, memorable experiences, career and assignment satisfaction, career progression, and higher marketability in the long term. There is an issue sometimes at the time of when you return, the first year after return. That is a sort of dip in many of these things, especially around career and assignment satisfaction, career progression. But in the long term, the evidence is very clear, individuals benefit on average. Families report also valuable learning experience, personal growth and identity changes. They report that they become cosmopolitan and more open to the world. Again, I would say with my set of assumptions, these are good indicators for also trailing families to live and work abroad, well, to live abroad. Locals and local teams report good international networking and positive learning effects where there is a friendly environment. And then organizations report knowledge transfer, a leadership pipeline progression, actually high performance, and they are persuaded that they have a good return on investment, which is something they don't really measure very well, but at least they are persuaded that they have this. So this is all about friendly environments. However, there might be unwelcoming and hostile environments. And these hostile environments are perceived by individuals as hostile due to threats originating by physical, psychological, or institutional factors in both work and non-work situations. We have a lot of information already about physical threats like terrorism or crime, and some information in the literature about natural disasters. We have very little about pandemics, but we are rapidly gathering information about that. Yeah. Then there are psychological threats, of course, that you feel. I mean, I'm giving you this lecture from the UK. The UK has decided to do a Brexit, so leave the EU, and therefore some of my interviewees indicate that they feel a bit more threatened and certainly less welcome in the UK. Yeah. And then there are some institutional factors where certain laws and regulations or cultural factors actually discriminate against individuals. Okay, what does it mean if we have these hostile environments and now in crisis times? Well, in hostile environments, individuals report dangers to life and health, and they report many psychological threats. For example, stress, work-life balance problems, they feel isolated, they actually use more alcohol or more substance abuse and so on. They also voice a loss of trust and engagement with their own organization. Okay, so relatively negative impact, where organizations can help to manage some of this. And the management could be in terms of how they select individuals. So they select individuals for higher resilience, for example, how they prepare individuals. Realistic job and country information helps people to be expecting more realistic things. But they can also have programs around how to deal with stress and work-life balance issues and so on. Okay. Families report fears, work-home spillover effects. So the expatriate comes home, complains or is stressed or is unhappy or drinks alcohol and so on. So these spillover effects that result in a psychological impact on the family. So they don't feel so happy or feel impacted. In some areas you have higher divorce rates and so on. And that is shown through relationship tensions. In hostile environments, also local teams report a stronger focus on differences. So they're looking at things differently. They're not thinking, what can I learn from the other person often? And they welcoming, different views. But they talk more about an us and them approach. And they voice more being treated as a second-class corporate citizen, because suddenly the huge salaries that some expatriates earn are seen as a problem, etc., etc. And then organizations report huge costs. In fact, where you have physical hostilities like terrorism, that's the locations where expatriation costs are the highest in the world. So it's not New York or Washington or Singapore or London or Tokyo. They are very expensive, but actually insecure areas are even more expensive for companies. Companies also report goal non-attainment by their expatriates because they have goals and objectives that they should achieve. And disengagement of people, retention problems from their expatriates. They report reputational problems with their local brand. They certainly find it difficult to get the right expat, as they call it to me, the right expatriate to go to these countries, and they feel they have a legal exposure. Okay. The one difference is when I worked with the UN, I worked with the World Food Program, where actually they have a sizable chunk of individuals working in WFP who want to go to hostile environments, because that's where you often have most hunger, and therefore in not-for-profit organization, these mechanisms might work in a slightly different way. Okay, so I'm talking a lot, but I'd like to give you a think piece or the chance to have a coffee or tea or some other drink. So for about 3 minutes or so, think about how do you think the current COVID-19 pandemic might impact or has already impacted individuals and organizations working internationally? And how can organizations and individuals manage the impact? So take 2 or 3 minutes, have a little break, think about these issues. So what is COVID-19 doing to global mobility in terms of individuals and organizations? Okay, so coming back to COVID-19 and its impact, you probably have a good feeling about what might have happened to people who worked and lived abroad. A lot of them have actually repatriated back into their home countries, for example, for the time being. Or what happened to international business trips. They've basically stopped and have been transferred into Zoom meetings and other meetings like we're having now. But what we wanted to explore together with Ernst & Young and an organization called the RES Forum is what happens now, what will happen, likely happen next, and then in the long term, what Ernst & Young called beyond. So now, next, and beyond. In terms of global mobility, so that decision makers and global mobility heads can move and adjust their policies. And in fact, these were the people we talked to. We explored the decision makers of RES Forum, this organization that has about 1,000 multinationals as members. And the people who are their members are the global mobility heads or the heads of global rewards, typically. So the GM crisis planning before COVID-19, and I had to do something in this radar graph to reverse some of the elements, but in essence, what this says is quite a lot of companies were hit by surprise, just a few were not hit by surprise. And only a few actually had emergency policies in place and deployed. So they were caught by surprise, really. Yeah. And ideally, they had often multinationals have an emergency policy around terrorism and quick, rapid evacuation, but not about health emergencies. The more positive part of this was that they had quite strong health risk mitigation approaches, which are essential to their duty of care. But if you look at the 3.9, the highest could have been 5. So there were some companies that didn't have the health risk mitigation. In fact, there were some companies where their health protection, health insurance didn't work in this scenario. So then you really have a problem. For you as individuals, check out how this crisis reaction might work in your organization if you ever want to work abroad. And companies, in essence, were pretty strong and persuaded that they coordinated with global mobility stakeholders quite well. So that was crisis planning before. In the immediate crisis reaction, we have, again, about 3.5 or so, advise, assist, and evacuate through emergency response systems. So quite a lot of companies did that. They had what they believed a lot and high quality COVID-19 communication, with obviously saying that they need to be flexible and that they don't know everything and they have to be guided by governments, but they communicated quite actively. Most had an implementation of adequate medical insurance, as I said before, but a few didn't. And most suspended business travel. Not all, but then there were some countries where business travel was still fine, especially internal business travel. When we did this survey in April and May this year, some countries hadn't gone into more thorough lockdown. What do companies believe short-term will happen? Well, they actually believe they will have a negative impact on the achievement of their global mobility objectives, the ones that I outlined before, on control and coordination, or knowledge transfer, etc. They believe they have a huge risk of mental health with their expatriates. They see excessive stress, loneliness, and worry about the family. They also think that there is a strong risk on performance on the job in the host country. They believe people don't go and tune easily to the local culture. Networking is obviously impeded, and it's different through technological means, and their overall job performance will suffer. But they don't believe that they have a problem with vendors, as they call them. These are service providers who help families to move from one place to another, to find schools for pupils and the kids of expatriates, etc., etc. And the service vendors actually have stepped up and have given quite a good service in the meantime. Lastly, what will happen in the long term? This is what companies currently believe. They believe that virtual work after the pandemic, so 1 to 3 years after the pandemic, this was our questions, will have increased dramatically. So it's unlikely to go completely away. They also believe that there is some major extent of reduced business travel. So the short-term business travel, where you fly from one place to another for a day or two, that will be impacted dramatically. The extent of reduced short and long-term assignments, short-term assignments last up to 1 year, long-term ones longer than a year, that they expect some reduction, but not quite as strong a reduction as in the other areas. And they also don't believe that the extent of international operations will dramatically decrease. They don't think about, withdrawing from countries just because of COVID. Okay, so that's an update of what could happen and what seems to happen in global mobility in terms of COVID-19. You have the chat function to ask me questions or comments. And I'd be interested to hear some of those. Graham, do you have any?
Hi, Michael. No, we've not actually got any questions in the chat yet, but one thing that sprung to mind while you were going through is, are you seeing any areas in the world start, and we can probably debate what normal is for a long time here, but are you starting to see any areas in the world begin to return to normal? Is there beginning to be some activity that's happening there?
I mean, literally, I had a meeting this afternoon with RES Forum and 25 other global mobility heads. And no, what they talk about is a stronger initiative to bring the work to people rather than people to work. So their whole being was bring people to work abroad, right? Now it is about how can we use virtual teams, virtual means to bring the work to the people wherever they are. They talk about compliance issues. So some people are simply stranded. Yeah. So just imagine you had been traveling somewhere and couldn't leave the country. Normally, it varies a bit, but normally you are only allowed to stay for 2 weeks and work for 2 weeks. Now, some of their people are actually stuck somewhere because the borders are closed. For example, in South America, quite a lot of borders are closed. And therefore, these people, how do they do the compliance with them? That's the issue. Do they have an exception to the work permit rules that says you're only allowed to work for 2 weeks? Normality, we haven't got that yet, not in terms of global mobility, at least. Is there
Thanks,
any?
Michael.
Yeah, welcome.
Let me just have a look. So I'm not seeing any other questions at the minute, Michael. So I think if I know you've got something that you wanted to talk about towards the end. So maybe we do that and we can wrap up early for people.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think it has been a long day for people, presumably.
Hey, Michael, this is Ipek. I'm just interrupting. I can see a couple of questions, actually,
okay.
so I can forward them for you.
Okay, yeah, please do.
Okay, so one of them is, do you believe that COVID may change the competition in employment market as people are learning how to work remotely, also from different companies?
Yes, I mean, that is actually a topic that we are discussing in these global mobility forums. but it's also a more general bit, and that is that the capabilities that you need, presumably, to work effectively virtually are different from those face-to-face. And so companies are shifting into this. It also means actually what they are thinking about is in the future some combination of much more virtual work and very little business travel. And that might be a trend that you can see more strongly in a few years, which means if you are, let me give you an example. If you are the marketing director Europe and you are located in London, you normally work in London, but you visit for days or a couple of days your operations in Belgium and Spain and wherever they are in Europe. While you did this maybe beforehand 1 week every month, now they're saying, why would we need that? Why not do this very rarely? So 1 day a month to one country, and that be it. And you only need to visit this country once or twice a year. And however, you need to compensate for some of these things that go on when you used to do your face-to-face interactions. So it's about how do you have clear leadership virtually, really, okay? And what does that mean for communication? What does it mean for knowledge transfer when things sometimes are codified, so you can read these up, that's fine, but when they are uncodified and it's about experience, okay? These people don't just give instructions, they are role models, and virtually that's much harder. So there's a range of things that might impact the needed competencies of people, and therefore overall the ideal person is shifting a bit. And you said you had a second question.
Yes, I have a lot of questions actually.
Now,
so
okay.
so
Yep.
let me Graham, do you want to go on? Okay,
I don't see any questions, I'm afraid.
Okay, so I'm going on. Okay, so what's your opinion about the travel bubbles to global mobility? Do you think that those travel bubble measures can endure after COVID-19?
You mean the sort of social bubbles, I guess, where you're trying to interact with few people and the same. I think, I mean, look, it's all speculations, okay? I think the game will change dramatically when we have a vaccine, and therefore the social bubbles will become slightly different. I don't really believe in in this idea of herd immunity. This might happen, but we are not, at least in the Western world, we are not stomaching the process to get there, right? So that's why we reacted into social bubbles ideas. I think because, so coming back to global mobility, it's absolutely clear that the employer has a duty of care, which means the employer has to try to maximize your security, which then would mean as long as we don't have a vaccine, the travel, etc., will be low. And there's a preference for social bubbles. After that, it's a new game, okay? Ipek, do you have another question?
Yes, I have another question. What options, countries and industries do you see in the short term for overseas placements, and what skill sets have you seen?
What options for overseas placements? Here in Cranfield, I run a program where we have placements into organizations. And what we had to shift into over the summer was a virtual placement, right? And we managed that more than 90% of our students got a virtual placement for 3 months in their organizations and work with them actually as we speak. Some of them still, and some have just about finished. And that is not so problematic. The actual presence placement, where you go face-to-face into an organization, they are not that keen at the moment. And therefore, foreign placements where you actually live abroad, and enter company premises are probably a real exception at the moment.
So one more question is, in an online-based environment, so this is not a question, let me go. When analyzing hostile environments, are companies considering the protection of LGBT and gender diverse persons when placing them in countries which are more conservative, discriminatory, especially in regard to potential criminal sanction and restriction to access to healthcare?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. It's a weakness in some companies. That's absolutely sure. Okay. What we are trying to do, so within RES, we've done a global mobility survey around responsibility and sustainability. And part of the responsibility element is the ethical approach to fairness of opportunity, but also to diversity and protection of rights, etc. So we know that companies could be better in this, that it's only emerging currently, the idea to integrate much stronger the diversity and inclusion elements into global mobility. And that it seems to be a more informal arrangement. So there are obviously some countries in the world that have laws and regulations that are not so good to certain communities. Yeah. So, for example, lesbian and gay communities. And the informality about this is that companies allow expatriates, potential expatriates, to say, this is not a place I want to live in. And therefore, they don't penalize them. They just move on and say, fine, let's try to find you another location if they are globally operating. Okay, the same goes simply for gender issues, sometimes in the Middle East and so on. Okay, so you have all sorts of issues. There might be issues against young people versus older people in certain countries, etc. So, and all these are often informally integrated in the global mobility approaches of companies. Another question?
Hi Michael, I'm back now. Yeah, sorry, I had to reset my system. So let me give you the next question. So what do you think about general immigration policies and the measures that have been adopted to protect family members' reunions during the pandemic period?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. That's almost a political and institutional question, right? There are some people absolutely stranded because of some of the more restrictive approaches from some countries. And here you have a clash of interests. Okay, so on the one hand, it's a clash of a health interest or an a country-wide approach to something, and the other one is trying to meet with family and loved ones. I can imagine that in many cases the family and loved ones are losing out. Okay, because the government, whatever government we talk about, is often not specifically interested in single cases. They have an overarching rule. Okay, and that is shown on all sorts of levels. Even in the UK, when they talk about we are doing self-isolation rulings to countries rather than to areas within specific countries. So the rules are often for large chunks of people, and therefore some individual people are missing out. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. So looking at another question that we've got here, some countries, especially in Western Europe, are facing a gentrification problem with the population growing older and very few young people coming in to take the place in the workforce.
Yeah.
Do you feel could this fact counterbalance the trend of reduction of GM through political programs for immigration?
It could. In fact, I mean, it's a highly political element, and if you look at countries in Western Europe, their net reproduction rate isn't normally given, so they're actually shrinking. They get older. And countries have reacted in different ways. I mean, this is migration studies, not global mobility studies per se. But for example, Germany has increased its effort to get highly skilled migrants in. These might be self-initiated. So we distinguish in our field between self-initiated and assigned expats. So assigned expats is what I talked about today. Those are people who move within a company normally and being sponsored by the company. The self-initiated expats are people who move because they want to move individually. No company sponsors them, and they become expatriates legally when they have a job outside. Otherwise, they're migrants. Okay, there is a lot of self-initiated expatriation going on in Germany because it's a society that grows old, and there are some countries that have more restrictive approaches to immigration, including the UK that has a much more restrictive approach, and therefore the patterns are kind of different. Okay, all right.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, you've got a couple of minutes left, and I know you wanted to
share the last one.
Off with some thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. Should I do this now?
Yeah, I think so, Michael. Yeah.
Okay, because my shared screen just kicked off, but I'll do it again. Okay. If I find, yeah, I think this is it. Here's my slide. Okay. So what I wanted to finish with, and again, this is about the more company assigned people, and the session today was about organizations and individuals in global mobility. So recommendations to shape the future of global mobility is refine your global mobility major incident or crisis planning as an organization, and know what is business critical. There are some assignments they talk about as business critical, but they aren't really. But others might be. Just understand as an organization what's really driving you. You should also understand the different quality of hostile or friendly environments and select, prepare, and manage global workers accordingly. Okay, there are resilience elements there that need to be taken care of, but also the individual interests of individuals. Third is think digitally and rethink working patterns. Use more virtual work and enable more flexible, probably home-based working locations. The fourth one is understand the impact of less business travel and fewer global assignments, which means you need to review the local talent management. This is a tremendous chance to actually further local talent and get the global balance better in one sense, because a lot of companies are heavily skewed towards their home country and talent from their home country, which they send around. This is your chance to encourage local talent. And then lastly, companies need to develop a compelling global mobility employee value proposition. It's gotten harder to excite people to work abroad because they now see higher risks. Therefore, you really need to work as an organization to create a compelling global mobility value proposition, which probably means much better career planning, career management for individuals, so that it's paying off in a better way. Okay, so that is for today the issues that I wanted to cover. Don't know whether we still have time or for another question, or whether the session is over. In my time, the session is over really, and therefore I'm saying thank you very much to the audience. It's been, unfortunately I couldn't see you, but it's been great at least to talk to you. Hopefully you learned at least one thing tonight, and then that would be great. Okay, have a good day or evening wherever you are, and enjoy your program. Thanks.